and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of the Hyperconscious Podcast. Today we have a very special guest. He is a porn, shopping, and digital addiction recovery life coach. One of his main goals and focuses is to help you become the best version of yourself. If you guys listen to this show, you know that is what we are all about as well. Today we are sitting down with the wonderful Joseph F. Price. What is happening, my man?
You're happening, and I'm so privileged that you put the F in my name because that's very important to me. I don't know why, but thank you very much for that, and thank you for having me also.
Well, you are very welcome. So we connected on LinkedIn, and I was going through your profile, and you actually messaged me when I was getting ready to message you and invite you on the show because our goal is to pull back the curtain on what is real and the real problems that people deal with and some of the stuff that might be considered taboo. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do? How did you get into the addiction recovery life coaching and where you are today? And then we'll dive into some of the specifics we have on the board here.
Well, I actually got into it by accident. I've been a life coach for about 12 or 13 years. And I just wasn't full time. I just had like a couple of clients along the way for the last 10 years. A couple of those clients stayed about that long. And one day a client had mentioned that he was watching too much porn. And I just kind of did just what I just finished doing. I didn't have a real good answer for it. So then I started to study about it, and I saw how bad it is for the human psyche, how bad it is for men. And I actually recognized and realized that some men are actually addicted to it. And then from there, I decided that that was something I wanted to do for two reasons. One is there's just so many regular life coaches that I wanted to kind of set myself aside apart from all the crowd, so to speak, and took about a year to learn various things about addiction, porn addiction, how to help people with porn addiction, and how it affects others.
So when we talk about an addiction in general, right, whether we're talking about porn, shopping, digital, alcohol, drugs, what is your definition of addiction? Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be the dictionary definition, but when you think of or when you hear the word addiction, what comes to your mind and how do you explain that to people?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that it's something that's compelling. It's something that you do unconsciously, and it's something that fulfills a great need. Now, the street version, for lack of a better term, says that it's something that it says all of the things I just mentioned, something compelling, something that you do unconsciously, something that you're pulled to do. But the street version says that it's something that affects you negatively, and it's something that affects a major area of your life negatively. So I would say that an addiction is a behavior that affects your life in a major way negatively, and you're conscious about it, and you can't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm. So we have a bunch of questions here on the whiteboard. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, we did a little mastermind prior to this interview about what we wanted to ask both individually and as a team. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, what are the signs within yourself? Like, how do you know when you are addicted to something? Because you can be addicted to almost anything, right? So how do you know?
Well, one of the telltale signs is can you not do something for 30 days? If you can't not do something for 30 days, more than likely, that's an addiction.
Interesting. And the only go ahead. Sorry.
Another way that you can tell if it's an addiction or not is when you don't do it. Do you find yourself anxious, depressed, disappointed, sad, some kind of captivating negative experience if you don't do it? Do you find yourself anxious? Do you feel like somebody's took something from you? Those are kinds of signs that you can tell that you're addicted to something.
So how does it start? So we talked about this in the preamble, I dealt with a little bit of not a little bit with porn addiction for a while, and it never felt like it started as an addiction. And this is another thing that you hear too, like everybody does it. That's what you hear a lot of people say, like, well, everybody does it. So how does it actually, where is that line of demarcation versus like, okay, I feel like this is something that is healthy, and like how does it get to the point where, you know, what triggers it? What triggers it from a behavior to an addiction?
I think it's a variable person to person, but what happens is addiction. It has progressions. It doesn't matter what addiction is. It starts with experimentation at the lowest level. Then it becomes something that's done for recreation. Then it becomes something that we abuse. Then it becomes something that we're compelled to do. And then it becomes a full blown addiction. So exposure is pretty much what factors into any addiction, whether it be a process addiction like porn, shopping, gambling, religion, and those kinds, versus substance abuse type of addictions. It graduates, and each person is different in how it graduates per individual. There's no template that decides what it is. Now, one of the problems with porn addiction is the fact that people get aroused, and arousal progresses to some type of act. And in this case, the act is masturbation. Masturbation evolves into another act called orgasm. So, number one, with the porn itself, it stimulates dopamine, which is a chemical. And then, of course, the masturbation stimulates other neurochemicals, oxytocin, another one called norepinephrine, which is close to adrenaline. And then the orgasm stimulates another one. So you actually have a cocktail of neurochemicals that are set off by this behavior. And that's what makes it addictive, in addition to the fact that in this day and age, because you have internet, it's different than when I was young, because I'm in my 50s. We used to have to go to magazine stores or such. But now kids can actually go into their phone. I mean, you know, we call the phone the drug dealer of the new millennium, basically.
Right.
So why? I don't want to. Let me make sure I frame this right. How is porn addiction bad for you? Like, what does it actually do to your brain, to you physiologically, to relationships, you know, to you mentally? Like, what actually happens when you are addicted to porn and you're partaking in excessive porn use?
Well, that's actually four questions. The first one, let's go with, again, we call it PMO, porn, masturbation, orgasm. So when you do PMO, that becomes what is what's known as an arousal template. This term was coined by Dr. Patrick Carnes, which is actually one of the big sexual addiction researchers. So what happens is that is what a person gets accustomed to. That becomes their sexual relationship. For a lot of people, porn, masturbation, orgasm is their first girlfriend. And so they don't know anything different than that. And what happens oftentimes is that sexual template has been created. So when they actually find the woman of their dreams, they can't even perform because they're used to being aroused a certain way. So they don't even get aroused physically. To just give you an idea of how we call it being addicted to pixels. It's so bad that I know of a gentleman who the only way him and his girlfriend could actually have relations, because he was so whacked with porn, was for his girlfriend to go in one room, him to be in another room, and her to be his cam girl until he got aroused, and then she had to run into the room so that he could complete the process.
Interesting.
Wow. Wow. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you here was, what are the common patterns? You mentioned in the preamble a little bit some common signs ahead of time that you do have an addiction. You work with a lot of clients that you're trying to help them overcome addictions. What are some of the signs for our listeners that they might be addicted? Because I'm convinced that we're all addicted to something. For me, I at one point was addicted to alcohol, and even though no one else would have labeled me that way because there's levels, like no one else knew that I had a problem, but I did because I could tell that it felt like it had power over me. How do people know when they are addicted? Because I think the first step to solving a problem is admitting it. So what are some common signs for people?
Well, one common sign for younger people that are less than 30, if and again, we're doing what we do, but if a guy can't masturbate without looking at porn, that's a good sign that he's got a porn addiction,
Right.
because he's warped his sexual template.
Mm. What about other addictions? Are there other common patterns of like whether or not you're addicted? Because I know you mentioned if you can't not do it for 30 days, you're most likely addicted. But here's the problem. A lot of people don't. Why would you quit something for 30 days to see if you're addicted until you first had an inkling that you're addicted? So like how do we get people to realize in advance that they might be addicted to something just because no one's labeled them that way? And I'm not saying we should label anyone, but like how do we raise their awareness, or Kevin and I's awareness, to like whether or not we are addicted to something? So for the gym, for example, like a lot of people say I should take more off days than I do. Like how would I know if I was addicted to the gym?
Well, again, most of the time we use the word addictive negatively, but still, I mean, there's a lot of good addictions. So I think that addiction isn't always negative. Some people are addicted to good spending habits. Some people are addicted to healthy habits. Some people are addicted to healthy spiritual habits. Some people are addicted to behave in positive ways in relationships. So, addiction in it of itself is not so bad, but most of the time, commonly, when we call something an addiction, it inherently means that it's something negative.
Wow, that was powerful. Thank you for that.
Joseph, so we've been talking about men in porn. Is there, like, what is the percentage, men versus women? Obviously, I'm sure that's hard to get an exact number on, but like, are there women that are addicted to porn, and what does that manifest as? Because obviously, the performance sexually is different between men and women. What actually happens when a woman is addicted to porn? And is that common?
It exists. Women actually, if you do some checking, digital checking, it shows that women are like 29% of the porn users.
Interesting.
Women are actually the fastest growing population of porn users. Another interesting statistic is that women who watch a bunch of porn or have a higher likelihood of being abused. And when I first heard that, it didn't really make any sense. But then I thought about it for a while, and it does make sense. And I can tell you why they are likely have a higher degree of abuse, is because they become immune to seeing things. They've seen it so much that they become immune to things that a woman that wasn't watching porn would call a red flag. They're immune to those red flags. And the red flags in certain situations are time to go versus, oh, that's a red flag. No, certain red flags mean put your keys in the ignition.
Right.
Wow.
Well, I was going to say, this is a question. So we talked about this in the preamble. Say there's a woman listening to this show, And we talked about D-Day, Discovery Day, when a woman might find out that her significant other is addicted to porn. If you are listening to this, right, and say somebody comes to the realization that, you know what, I think I have a porn addiction, how do you share that addiction with a loved one? I mean, any addiction, I'm sure, is hard to share, but I feel like porn is such a personal one, and you feel like you're probably hiding something from your significant other, and you might feel like you're going to hurt their feelings. How do you share that with them, and what is that like on the other end for the person who is finding out all this about their loved one?
Well, there's a strategic way to share. They call it disclosure, and it's something that it's usually best done with a therapist because of the fact that it's a heated situation, and it should be handled properly in the proper environment. What happens for a lot of women is that they don't feel like it's a nothing thing. So it's very devastating to them. And the term scientifically, it's called betrayal trauma. And betrayal trauma meets the 5 criteria that you have in PTSD. And so it's actually a form of PTSD. And oftentimes the woman, unlike other addictions where they do affect the family a little bit, this one in a lot of cases, probably about 70% of the cases, the woman starts wondering, is she good enough? Is she not sexy enough? Does the man not like her body? All these kinds of things that don't have anything to do with their partner's addiction. They start asking themselves a whole bunch of questions of that regard. And as well as I do, if you ask a stupid question or a bad question, the only thing you can come up with is a bad answer. And then when you come up with a bad answer, that is where your beliefs come from.
Right. So there's a couple things jumping off the page here. So I'll never forget when I first read that in this country, the largest form of shame for women is body image, and the largest form of shame for men is not being financially successful. Now, that resonated pretty deeply, and it was someone on stage who said it. I haven't necessarily done a ton of research digging deep into that, but that did resonate. When it comes to addiction and shame and admittance, the admittance factor, the I have a problem and it's okay and I'm going to work on it, like, why do you believe more people don't get there to that place? Because honestly, I'll just say this for context. I admitted having a drinking problem, and that was the day where I really did start to overcome it. And I've since, I don't drink anymore, like, ever. So, but if I have other people in my life who, quite frankly, I saw that I believe had a worse drinking problem than I ever did, but they never admitted that they had a problem, therefore they never consciously worked on it. So why don't more people admit when they have a problem, in your opinion?
Well, the first thing, it's like almost the reason that's behind anything that's not good for you or not success oriented is fear. And a lot of people are very afraid, and they're afraid to open up about these kinds of things. I mean, these are not the most comfortable things for people to talk about.
Right.
And it's, once they open up, once they talk about it once, it's like a whole weight gets off of their chest. But until they get it, they're like wrapped around fear, and then they're wrapped in shame, which is basically angry at yourself for the behavior that you did.
Joseph, can you be wired for a certain addiction? So I remember telling Alan this, like, when I kind of came to grips with the fact that I was addicted to porn, like, this was after the fact. Well, not after the fact. This was like years after. And I remember saying to Alan, like, I remember the first time I ever saw any sort of pornography, I was probably like 6 years old. So I wonder, like, how many of our addictions are just past traumas that are manifested? Like, can you be wired for a certain type of addiction?
I'm going to not answer that specifically because I'm not going to speculate in terms of can you be wired for a specific addiction. What I can say is once you have crossed the threshold of addiction, then you have rewired your brain and you have an addictive brain. And we've all heard people joke around and say, I have an addictive personality. No, they don't have an addictive personality. They've actually done addictive behavior that has rewired your brain. And once it's rewired, it's permanently rewired. That's not like a death sentence. It's just something that you have to deal with. So oftentimes, this addiction or other addictions, they go from one to another. So a person gets off of porn and then they drink. Person stops drinking and then they do porn. Person stops doing porn and then they gamble.
Interesting. Okay.
So neuroplasticity, a lot of the science I've studied talks about how the brain is always changing. Every belief, every thought, every feeling, every action, especially actions, rewire our brain chemically, structurally, and functionally. And there's a lot of TED Talks and neuroscientists that have dug deep into proving this. And the thing that's interesting is the myelin sheath, just real quick, is an insulation across neurons that basically create neural pathways to make behaviors more automatic. Okay, now, when Kevin was 6 and saw porn, if that started a behavior that then was repeated over time, his myelin sheath grew towards that behavior. That's why, me drinking from a very young age made it more difficult to uproot that bad habit. What is your take on the neuroscience behind addiction, and how can we help raise the awareness of our listeners to really understand, like, okay, you're not bad, maybe the behavior was bad, and now we can start to change it, literally, with neuroscience?
See, that's an area in terms of scientifically that I don't really want to go into because that's not my area of high specialty in terms of communicating about it. I know a little something about it, but I'm just going to kind of leave that alone. That's just a little higher than my pay grade, shall we say.
Okay, well, I respect that very much. In terms of the proactive approach of like, okay, I have this thing. I know that I'm addicted to it. I'm having trouble stopping it for 30 days straight, and I'm feeling those, sad feelings without it. Now, what are the action steps? Oh, okay, to admit, yes, I've admitted I have this addiction. What are the action steps for our listeners or for Kevin and I to like actually be proactive and be strategic with overcoming this quote-unquote addiction?
Well, I think this is the same pretty much for any addiction. I think you can explain it differently, but the way I like to explain it, the way I like to think of it, is that addiction is like, recovery is like a 3-component process. One process is recovery mechanics, learning about the addiction, learning about your behavior, modifying your behavior, getting rid of the computer, getting rid of Facebook, getting rid of things that make it easy for you to behave the way that you are doing that's undesirable. Journal writing, learning about yourself, developing a sense of mastery. I call that recovery mechanics. That's one. Then the second component is healing. And healing is, I would say, a twofold part. One is, in a lot of cases, people have something that's going on, like a trauma, something that happened when they were younger. So I call that original healing that's necessary. And then also the addiction itself causes damage. So they need to heal from the healing that's needed from the addiction, and they need to heal from the original wound, if we will. So mechanics, healing. And then the third thing is to create a compelling future, something where, as you talk about in your work, which is for people to actually engage in the process of manifesting, creating, and doing the work to create their best self. So it's those 3 parts.
That was powerful.
Yes,
Thank
we
you so much for
appreciate
sharing
the
that.
love as well.
Yeah, thank
so
you.
we've talked about porn and the addiction. When you say digital addiction, what does that actually mean? And like, what are we talking Facebook, Instagram? Are we talking Netflix? Like, when you say digital addiction, what are some ways that addiction can manifest?
Well, I mean, I think the word digital addiction is just something that sounds nice,
Mm.
but if you really want to talk about it, the people that create pretty much every electronic device have created it so that the experience is compelling. They have created it in some cases deliberately to be addictive.
Right.
Facebook is on record for admitting that they created their site to take as much of your conscious attention and time as possible. That's what Facebook is created to do. So there's all kinds of things that go on in the algorithms. You get notified when they think that you're about ready to leave. They can set the feed up based on what they think that you need to be fed to keep you as long as possible. So that model has, Silicon Valley is kind of like a big family. So they've taken that model and they've implemented it into every single electronic device. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound all that bad. That's just good business. However, for the susceptible, that's the worst thing in the world.
Right.
The porn sites are compelled to keep you on there. YouTube is compelled to keep you on there. Facebook's compelled to keep you on there. Twitter's compelled to keep you on there. The games themselves, the people that go into gaming, they're compelled to keep you on there. And again, that main happy chemical, if you will, dopamine is released.
Right.
Every time you get a like, that releases dopamine. Every time you get you find that you've got a bunch of stuff in your status bar that gives you a jolt of energy.
When do you come across when you're dealing with digital addiction? Do you ever come across people who, they'll put posts up about their body and they really like the attention they get and the love from that? Like, is that because I'm sure there's so many different things. Like, obviously, it's the dopamine addiction, and I think we're all susceptible to that because it's such a powerful drug to us, right? But what are some of the common reasons for, like, the deeper reasons for digital addiction? I know, like, sometimes I just get lost in, because Instagram caters your content. You said, like, the algorithms, if you're looking at cars, it tends to show you more cars to keep you, in that cycle. But what are some of the other things about digital addiction that you find?
Well, I would say starting with Instagram, number one, and as a coach, we would recommend that a person doesn't look at Instagram unless they have to look at it for business.
Right.
And here's why. Most of the pictures that are there, a lot of the women that take pictures, you had mentioned it a minute ago, where with women, their validation is their body. With men, their validation is their money. So you have a lot of women on Instagram that are taking pictures and them getting likes are about them validating themselves. And that's why it's dangerous for a porn addict, because of the fact that those pictures are risque and then they lead a person to wanting something more.
Right.
Yeah. We're in this strange time where it's like we're all so susceptible to this because it's literally pulling on our wiring as humans.
Right.
To like, oh, there's a picture of a girl in a bikini. Like 15 years ago, you had to
be at the beach.
You have to, and like even the music videos now are like they're like softcore porn. It's a very interesting time to be alive.
Yeah, we've always sex always sells, and as we become more mature, we begin to realize that that's all well and good, but some of that stuff is getting the best of us, and
right.
Some of that stuff is a lie,
right?
And some of that stuff interferes, with us actually becoming our best self.
Right.
Right.
So off the top of my head, I don't know many people that I know that could go 30 days without social media. If you had to, and I know this is speculation, so maybe this is more of an opinion than a professional opinion, but if you had to say there's 1,000 people that listen to this episode, and just say there are 1,000 people from normal walks of life, how many people would you say are addicted, like have a digital addiction? Now, maybe it's not off the rails and they're not able to get any work done, right? But obviously there's different levels of addiction. If you had to pick a number, and again, speculation, but let's speculate a little bit.
Well, I would say that I would say at some degree, maybe 70 to 80%, because one of the things I always talk to people about where we start, and by the way, shopping addiction these days is not people going into stores, it's actually them buying online today.
Right.
Right.
What the first thing I would tell a person is one of the premises is that what we're going to do is we're going to change our relationship with the digital devices. That's a premise that we start with.
Right.
And one of the things that most people do is the first thing they do when they get up is they look at their phone.
Yep.
As crazy as it may sound, I know you guys are younger than me, but I've read stories where there's a percentage of people in the younger category that actually look at their phone when they're making love. I don't get it,
Interesting.
but there are people that do that because they don't want to miss out on anything, and they basically have an unhealthy relationship with their digital devices. One of the things if the first thing I start with a person just to get them started so they can get some traction is work up, and everything that we do in terms of transforming behavior is in steps. Work up to an hour in the beginning of the day, no phone. An hour at the end of the day,
Right.
no phone or screens. Work up in 15-minute increments because you want to change the relationship that you have with your digital equipment. Another thing is change the ringtones and alert tones on your phone, because you're almost like a Pavlov dog if you've had the same text sound for 3 years, I guarantee you when you hear that sound, you just automatically respond.
Right.
If you're next to somebody and they're using the exact sound, your phone's in the car. But I bet you're going to look around and put your hand on your pocket.
Right.
The digital addiction is, I honestly believe that it's a huge problem. I mean the solicitations on the weakest side of our nature have never been higher. I mean, it just is. Everything's at one click. I mean, even look at Amazon. This is nothing against Amazon. This is nothing against Bezos. But the number one priority for Amazon since the beginning is to help you make a purchasing decision. Now, if there's no resistance to purchasing something, the likelihood of you getting addicted to purchasing things is way higher. Like, if the gym is at your home, it's going to be easier to go to the gym because the resistance to going there is less. So it's just, when you can one-click something and it comes to your door in 2 days, and you can get a credit card that has, no interest for the first however many months. Like, it's just set up for like it's set. The world is very set up for addiction in the digital age, and I'm just so grateful that you came on the show and just like illuminated some of the challenges. Technology's awesome. Okay, I love technology. It's made life better in so many ways, but it also, there's a double-edged sword here that we have to be aware of if we want to stay the master and not the slave. So
is it going to get worse, Joseph? Like, aren't we kind of, I mean, how long has there been porn on cell phones? It hasn't been that long. And like, Amazon is relatively new in the grand scheme of the 2-day shipping. Like, what do you see the future of porn, shopping, digital, like all forms of that kind of addiction? What do you see in the future for that?
They're going to get worse. I don't want to get into any specifics because I don't want to promote porn, but one of the things that happens is with porn is that people, like I said, we get addicted to those neurochemicals. These are self-created chemicals. And some of those chemicals are actually, they call them endogenous opiates. So some of the chemicals that you create are actually painkillers,
Interesting.
coping mechanisms.
Right.
So the answer to the question is that it is going to get worse because of the fact that they've got stuff. They have porn now that is deliberately designed to create addiction.
Yeah.
All right, you've done hypnosis tapes before, right?
Yes, I have.
Oh, and you understand the principle?
Yes.
Yeah, well, they got porn like that now.
Right.
Interesting. And they have VR.
That's all about that's all about you becoming something that you aren't. The same way that we get those positive suggestions, they're actually dumping out negative suggestions. So that's going to create a whole can of worms within itself. They have virtual reality devices that are actually going to be connected with the porn. So it's not going to get better, and it's going to get worse.
I think the main thing that's really jumping off the page here is like we live in a world where the pleasure, these dopamine hits are easier and easier to get, but at the expense of fulfillment, at the expense of growth, at the expense of personal development. To me, the answer to all of these challenges really is personal development, because if you look at trigger, behavior, reward, the habit loop of the human mind, you know, the more well-developed you are and the more aware, hyper-conscious you are of these things, the more likely you can fight against those negative behaviors and create positive ones. So I'm a serial optimist, so I know it will get worse in terms of the technological advances, but I think personal development is the solution, and I'm glad that we're all on the mission to help people, you know, really become the masters and not the slaves of this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that you just hit the main thing that's behind all addictions, is that people's sense of how they get rewards becomes a little whacked out.
Right.
And so they did, you know, I mean, that's simple ABC math, but they need to figure out healthier ways, positive ways to reward themselves, because that's at the core of what is underneath any kind of addiction that keeps them compelled, is that they've convinced themselves that a certain behavior is the way that they get the reward.
Right. Right.
All right, Joseph, we only got a few minutes. Alan and I usually ask each guest 2 special questions. I'm actually going to switch mine up today. Say you and I start talking, and you say to me, Kevin, I think you have a digital addiction. And I come back and say, Joseph, but what's the big deal? I still get all my work done. I don't feel like it's affecting me negatively. What's the big deal? Like, why should I admit that I have a problem? And why is it that big of a deal?
Well, if we're talking about porn as an example, one of the reasons why it should be a big deal is because of the fact that, as I talked about earlier, you're eroding and changing your sexual template. So a person that watches too much porn is stimulated only by pixels. Now, this is a growing problem with younger people, that they become they have erectile dysfunction. In fact, the greatest growing number of people taking erectile dysfunction meds are under 40. That's one of the reasons that you're gonna wreck your sex life. Number 2, that's going to contribute to a wrecked marriage. Number 3, one is, you know, like when I was a kid, the way that we got into porn, most of us, was that we found a box of porn that somebody threw out.
Oh,
That's how it happened.
I had to hide a magazine under a log and bury it.
Yes, sir.
It got rained on, Joseph. It was devastating. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Now,
Sorry.
today, a kid could put Power Ranger or try to put Power Ranger into the browser and PO, and then his dad was watching something that had that term in it, and all of a sudden in the history, now he's got all this stuff. Right. This is how kids, so, you know, one reason is to protect your kids, because the way the kids are getting into it is they're going on a computer behind an adult, finding the site, and then they just, the same thing that we did, except we did it with the magazines by hand. Then they take the website addresses and text it to their friends.
Right.
Okay.
Wow. That was a blast from the past.
Yeah.
I remember the
And
first.
that's a fire answer too, because you don't always think of the other people. You think your addiction is only hurting you, or you think that your behavior is only hurting you, and that's several good reasons right there why to nip it in the bud.
Powerful. All of our behaviors affect other people. Go ahead, Joseph. You were going to say
Yeah,
something?
everything that we do affects something else. I mean, we made up a movie called The Butterfly Effect, but that is so true to reality. There's nothing that you or I are ever going to do that isn't going to affect something else.
Right.
Whether it affects somebody else or not, that's a different story. But everything that we do affects something else.
So I have one last question as well. I'm also going to mix it up here because this
Ooh,
has been a very
freestyle.
fascinating episode. So I believe in something that I call 3/5 associations. So I believe we are the sum average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. I know you've heard that quote. It's a very famous personal development quote by Jim Rohn. I believe if 3 out of your 5 closest friends who you spend the most time with smoke cigarettes, you're most likely going to end up smoking cigarettes. So change in environment versus change in willpower. How do you change an addiction if you had to choose changing your environment versus trying to use willpower? Which one's better, and how do you change your associations to help support your new, ambition?
Well, my first answer, I'm going to go 2 ways. Number one, it took me a while because I'm a deep guy. We haven't had a chance for you to see how deep I am. I'm not patting myself on the back too much, but I spent some time thinking. You got to go further than the 5 people that you spend the most time with, because you got to know who the 5 people that they spend the most time with, because that's who's influencing them.
Right.
And consequently, indirectly, they're influencing you. So the 5 people, yeah, that's good. You need to take it another level if you can. If you can find out the 5 people that influence them the most. And then what was the question?
So the second one was environment change versus willpower, because a lot of people see smoking as a sign
no,
of
I
weakness,
got
for
you.
example.
I got you.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So my answer straight up is screw willpower.
Right.
Willpower is like a barrel that fills itself up and it drowns itself up and it fills itself up. It's kind of like it's like a lake, except the thing is if it's a lake that's going to dry out if you rely on it totally, and it fills itself up slowly. So you're not. That's why people fail. Is that I'm going to do this thing? No, you save your willpower for the boundaries. You save your willpower for when you feel like doing something that's not good for you, that you already have a boundary that says, I'm going to leave the house.
Right.
You already have a boundary that says no electronic equipment when I feel I want to spend some extra money.
Powerful.
That is.
You have a boundary that says before I even sit down at the computer, I've already decided how long I'm going to be at the computer and what I'm going to do at the computer.
Powerful.
See, that's where you use your willpower versus using your willpower to keep you from doing something, because willpower doesn't work because it dries out. Willpower works when you have a bad habit or a problem, but it doesn't work with addiction. And a lot of times people want to bring that into addiction and they fail. You have to have boundaries. You have to have what we call recovery capital. That's friends, books, education, behavior tactics, plans. You plan A, plan B. No, we got plan Z for everything.
Powerful. So use your willpower to create environment change, create boundaries, create structure that supports your recovery. That's fire.
Joseph,
Yeah.
you survived the hyperconscious gauntlet. Tell the people where they can find you, where they can learn more about you. Maybe if something in this episode shook something free in them and they want to hire you as a coach. Talk about yourself, Joseph.
Okay, well, I because of the fact most of my clients are private, I really haven't spent a whole lot of time on web work. They can actually go to my Facebook page by going pornrecovery.coach. Pornrecovery.coach. That's actually a website that redirects to my Facebook page. But the best thing for them to do, really, you can look at this and look at that and look at this information. The best thing for them to do is to take advantage of a 30-minute discovery call that I offer to anybody They can reach me at 407-988-8035, 407-988-8035. And then we just talk about their situation. I give them a few tips, look at various options in terms of how I can help them, give them referrals, et cetera, if necessary. Because reading and learning and doing all this feel-good stuff, that's not going to change the behavior. If you want to change the behavior, you've got to get recovery capital. Recovery capital is just like business. What do we want to do? If I gave you $1 million to start a business, Kevin, and gave Alan $1, who do you think would be likely to succeed?
Kevin would succeed.
There you go.
Alan would
so
still
you need
try.
you need to have recovery capital in your recovery. Friends that are supporting you, like-minded people that are supporting you,
Coaches.
books that you've read, knowledge that you build, things that you learn through your through journal writing, a coach, a therapist, and continuously, self-improvement at the same time. Because like I said, it's 3 different things that you have to put together. You got to heal, you got to learn the recovery mechanics, and then you got to create a kick butt life. And the way that you create a kick butt life is through hyper consciousness.
Yay!
Thank you.
Joseph, if you want to talk now about sending that $1 million over, or do you want to talk after? What works best for you in terms of sending me that money? I do have Venmo.
Well, what I was thinking works best is for y'all to put together $500,000 each and send it this way. That's what I was thinking.
That works. It could be up to 2 weeks. It could be up to 2 weeks, Joseph.
It will definitely be up to 2 weeks.
Joseph, we'll have to do this again. I'd love to go deeper. I know you said that you're a deep human. We didn't get super deep. I think we stayed on. Alan and I are very interested in the addictions, and the porn thing was something for me that I dealt with. But human behavior is something that really inspires us, and I appreciate you taking us through some of the addictions and how they manifest and all that. We greatly appreciate your time, and I look forward to doing this again in the near future.
Be my pleasure. I appreciate you guys having me on today, and I appreciate the connection that we've made. I'm sure we'll get back together soon.
We definitely will, Joseph. Thank you. One more thing I want to say for the listeners. Kevin and I set an intention and a takeaway that we really wanted for this episode, and it's just tremendous. Like, we want to raise your awareness. If you do have an addiction to anything, the first step to overcoming that is going to be becoming aware of it, and then finding the resources and support system to really support that. I've been addicted to alcohol. Kevin's been addicted to porn. Like, you're not alone. Everyone struggles with this, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. So just the only wrong answer is to not try to improve. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you so much, Joseph, for coming on the show.
Thank you. And one of the things that's that cohabitates with addiction is that there's always a lack of connection and there's always isolation. So that's something that they can remedy by talking about their problems with people.
Right.
That is a great point.
Powerful.
That is a great point. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Joseph F. Price.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.